I found the guardianship application on the kitchen counter with my brother Lewis's signature, listing himself as my grandmother's sole guardian. It was like a cold wave washed over me. My grandmother, who raised us when our parents were too busy, had been the heart of our family. She didn't need someone to control her life. She needed our love and respect. The papers were neatly arranged, the legal jargon stark against the creamy sheets. They were official, binding, and entirely unauthorized by anyone but Lewis. I traced his name with my finger, feeling betrayal seep into my bones. We had always promised each other that we'd look after her together. My mind flashed back to our last conversation over a bland family dinner where Lewis had been unusually evasive. I'd asked him about his recent lack of visits to see Grandma. He'd merely shrugged, mumbling something about work. Now his intentions seemed painfully clear. I clutched the papers and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. This wasn't just about guardianship. It was about control over Grandma's estate, her savings, her life. I knew Lewis had been struggling with debts, but this seemed too calculated, too cold. I heard footsteps coming down the hallway and turned to see Lewis leaning casually against the doorway, arms crossed. His eyes flicked to the papers in my hand, and a look of recognition crossed his face. The smirk that followed was infuriatingly smug. "Found them, huh?" he said, not even bothering to feign surprise. "It's for her own good, you know. She needs someone who can really manage everything." His words rolled off his tongue with an ease that made my skin crawl. I didn't argue. Instead, I felt a quiet resolve settle in. If Lewis thought he could slide this past me, he was mistaken. Our grandmother deserved better than to be a pawn in whatever game he was playing. The room was silent, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, marking time until I could act. I knew I had to move carefully. There had to be a way to protect her, to ensure her voice and wishes were at the forefront, not Lewis's ambition. As Lewis left the room, I folded the papers and slipped them into my bag. There was work to do, and I wouldn't rest until I'd set things right. I watched Lewis stand there, his arms still crossed, an air of certainty surrounding him. He seemed so sure of his actions, as if being sole guardian of our grandmother was not only right but necessary. "She's getting on, you know," he continued, his voice unmistakably. "She needs someone who's not going to be emotional about it all." I sat there, trying to wrap my mind around the fact that he had done this behind my back. My heart sank as I glanced down at the numbers on the documents, seeing exactly what I feared. Balances of accounts that spoke of years of careful saving on Grandma's part. It was clear what Louis saw, what had tempted him. "Focused care," he repeated, as if the phrase itself had some magical quality. "I can arrange things better than a place can. I'd keep her comfortable, make sure everything's looked after." His words coated with such false sincerity it almost made me feel sick. But I said nothing, letting him ramble on, the resolve building within me. I nodded slowly, letting him believe I was swayed by his explanation. "And," he added, his tone shifting slightly to reveal a hint of frustration, "there's no need to overcomplicate things with lawyers or families fighting over it." That's when it hit me. Louis really thought he could bypass everyone and everything. I felt anger simmer quietly beneath my skin. He was turning something sacred, our responsibility to Grandma, into a mere transaction. But I stayed silent, not revealing the turmoil inside. "You know she's not in her best health," he continued, now avoiding my eyes. "What she needs is security, consistency. You can barely manage your own hectic life, let alone deal with Grandma's affairs." My own hectic life? His words cut, but they revealed more about his intentions than anything else. Louis was desperate, I could tell. Perhaps his debts were crushing him more than he let on. But none of that justified his betrayal. I took a breath, steadying myself, and looked up. "You sure have it all figured out," I said softly, watching his reaction closely, the facade almost faltering. "It's just a lot to take in." Louis shifted, uncrossing his arms, perhaps sensing a challenge in my voice but not daring to acknowledge it. "We both love her, don't we?" he insisted, sounding almost as if trying to convince himself as much as me. "This is what's best." In that moment, I knew I had to play my part carefully. He underestimated me, that much was clear. I couldn't let him know just yet how fully I intended to counter his plan. "I suppose," I replied evenly, keeping my expression, "but we need to ensure everything is handled properly." He nodded, seemingly placated for now, satisfied that I wasn't going to rock his boat immediately. I watched him leave, the weight of his decision trailing behind him like a shadow. Despite his confidence, there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, like he knew my compliance wasn't genuine. Once alone, I allowed myself a moment to breathe, To absorb what had just transpired, Lewis's claim to guardianship, to Grandma's life and finances, was as much about securing his own security as it was about anything else. But he would learn soon enough that I wouldn't let him manipulate our grandmother for his own gain. As the sun slipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the room, I knew the path before me. There was no turning back. I had to protect Grandma. She had raised us, instilled in me the strength to face challenges with quiet determination. No, I wouldn't confront Lewis now. That moment would come, but not yet. First, I'd gather what I needed, ensure that when the time came to act, I'd have every piece of evidence ready. I slid the guardianship papers back into my bag, the resolve cementing with each passing heartbeat. Tomorrow, I would begin to unravel Lewis's scheme, one careful step at a time. Grandma's future wouldn't be stolen from her under my watch. The next morning, I started early, determined to piece together the puzzle Lewis had created. The first order of business was gathering documents, evidence that would lay bare the reality of Grandma's financial state and, hopefully, Lewis's true intentions. Grandma's home was a trove of memories, but it was also where she'd kept meticulous records of her accounts, logbooks, and old bank slips tucked away for years. I sifted through them, trying to discern the current from the obsolete. Among the piles, I found her latest bank statements, her savings reflecting decades of careful management. The numbers were proof that she didn't need Lewis's intervention, just as I'd suspected. Every figure, every transaction was a testament to her independence. I quietly documented each piece, snapping photos with my phone and noting down details. As I worked, my resolve only grew stronger. Lewis might have convinced himself that his actions were somehow justified, but in reality, he was gambling with Grandma's trust. Her savings were meant for her security, not his ambition. I could almost hear her voice as I sat there, reminding me to always act with fairness and integrity. When I had everything I needed from the house, I knew the next step was crucial. Grandma's longtime lawyer, Mr. Everett, was a logical ally. He'd known our family for years, handling all the legal intricacies of her estate with precision and care. I hoped he'd be willing to help us now. Reaching him was easy. He'd been expecting a call ever since he caught wind of the guardianship application. "I've been concerned, truthfully," he said when I finally spoke to him. His voice was his concern palpable through the receiver. "This move by Lewis, it's not what your grandmother would have wanted." I explained the situation as succinctly as I could, outlining Lewis's application, the looming threat over Grandma's finances, and my intention to contest it. Mr. Everett listened patiently, occasionally interjecting with a clarification or a nod of understanding I could almost see across the distance. When I finished, he assured me that we had grounds to act. "We'll need to gather more concrete evidence, build a case that unequivocally demonstrates Lewis's intent. You've already taken the right steps. The financial records will be invaluable." I felt a small measure of relief wash over me. This was the first tangible step towards keeping Grandma's future intact. Knowing that someone with professional insight was on our side made the task feel less daunting. Mr. Everett suggested we meet in person to review everything in detail. The idea was to prepare our position comprehensively, ensuring that when the time came to present, we'd leave no room for ambiguity. His approach lent me a confidence I'd been lacking since discovering the application. After hanging up, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The day ahead felt long, but I was ready. There was a comfort in knowing that Mr. Everett would handle the legal complexities, leaving me to focus on what I knew best, my grandmother and the life she had built. I returned to her home that afternoon, looking for any other documentation that might help, like old medical reports or personal letters she'd kept. I found her address book, worn and filled with contacts stretching back decades. Among the names were neighbors and old friends, people who knew her well and might attest to her independence and capability. I made mental notes of who to contact, thinking about how to approach them gently without raising alarms unnecessarily. The prospect of involving others was daunting, but necessary. I realized the importance of moving quietly, not alerting Lewis to my intentions. He needed to believe that I was still considering his version of guardianship so he wouldn't obstruct my efforts. As dusk approached, I finished my day's work, returning home with a growing arsenal of documents and contacts. The sense of betrayal still lingered, a persistent shadow, but I was channeling it into something productive, something protective. I couldn't understand why Louis had chosen this path, whether it was desperation or greed. But I couldn't afford to dwell on that now. My role was clear. Defend Grandma, no matter how tangled the path became. Finally, I made a checklist for Mr. Everett, listing all the evidence I had gathered and outlining my next steps. I was ready for our meeting, determined to protect her as she had always protected us. The quiet satisfaction from knowing I was doing the right thing was a balm to my heartache. As I prepared for bed, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Though the road ahead was uncertain, I knew in my heart that I was right. Lewis had underestimated both Grandma's resilience and mine. Perhaps he believed that silent acquiescence meant I was defeated, but he would soon learn the strength that lay behind my acceptance. Tomorrow promised more of the same: calls to neighbors, more meetings, and slowly pulling the veil off my brother's deception. But tonight, I was content with the progress, confident in the steps we were taking. The weight of duty settled around me like a comforting blanket, pulling me into a restless but determined sleep. The family dinner was set in our usual way, with everyone gathered around Grandma's sturdy oak table. Louis sat across from me, seemingly at ease, laughing and joking with our cousins as if there was nothing amiss. I watched him over the rim of my glass, observing the easy camaraderie that colored his every interaction. It was strange seeing him like this, a facade of normalcy when underneath lay the betrayal that had gnawed at my heart for days. The meal progressed, and discussions flowed from mundane daily routines to more ambitious topics. As plates began to clear, I seized the moment. I leaned back, adopting a casual tone that belied the seriousness of my thoughts. "So, Louis," I began, keeping my voice light enough to blend with the room's ambient noise, "I heard you've been looking into properties by the lake." I glanced at him, gauging his reaction. His fork paused mid-air before he set it down, looking at me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, just checking out options for the future," he replied, dismissive as if it was an afterthought. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral, though my heart thundered beneath my calm exterior. Interesting timing, isn't it, with everything going on? I met his gaze, holding it steady. Louis chuckled, a sound that felt oddly disconnected from the tension sitting heavy between us. "Timing's just a coincidence, really. You know how it is with these things." I let the silence stretch a few seconds longer than necessary, watching as our cousins resumed their chatter, oblivious to the undercurrent in our conversation. "Coincidences are funny like that," I remarked, my voice betraying nothing of the storm within, "especially when they align with significant changes in other areas." He shifted slightly in his seat, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features before he smoothed it away. "I've got everything under control, don't worry about it." I bit back the desire to argue, clenching my hands under the table to maintain composure. Instead, I offered a small smile, a silent agreement to maintain the charade for now. "If you say so," I said, letting the conversation drift back to lighter topics with a well-placed comment about our cousin's new job. The evening continued uneventfully, with laughter and shared stories echoing through the old house. I participated when appropriate, though my mind remained a whirl of plans and contingencies. Louis' nonchalant, his tendency to assume I was still his ally, only fueled my resolve. Each moment of his obliviousness felt like another point in my favor, another step closer to exposing his deception. By the time dessert was served, I'd succeeded in what I set out to do: sow seeds of subtle doubt. The hints were planted, though Louis might not yet feel the ground shifting beneath him. I'd done what I could that night, nurturing the quiet storm gathering just beyond his sight. As I left the table to help with dishes, Grandma caught my eye from her spot by the window. Her knowing smile, the gentle kindness she always radiated, reminded me why this battle was so important. Protecting her meant preserving the family legacy she had worked so hard to build, ensuring her twilight years were filled with peace, not the turmoil of someone else's greed. In the dim light of the kitchen, I scrubbed a plate clean, the dishwater warm against my fingers, mirroring the resolve warming my heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more pieces to place in this delicate puzzle. Yet, amidst the clinking of silverware and soft murmurs of farewells, I found solace in knowing I wasn't alone. Grandma's quiet strength bolstered me, her unspoken support an anchor through the uncertainty. As Louis waved goodbye, the evening drawing to a close, I watched him walk down the driveway, his confident stride fading into the night. My course was set, actions measured, each day a step closer to revealing the truth. The quiet determination within me was unfaltering as I closed the door against the cool night air, securing us within the safety of our home. I was ready. This was only the beginning, and Louis would soon understand just how deep my roots ran. The days that followed felt like a marathon without a finish line. My mind was a whirlpool of thoughts, each tumbling over the next as I juggled work and the task at hand. The evidence needed to be airtight, comprehensive enough to counteract whatever narrative Louis might concoct. I spent hours sifting through financial records, bank statements, investment accounts, anything that painted the true picture of Grandma's fiscal health. I couldn't afford any mistakes. Each evening, I met with Mr. Everett at his office. He was my calm in the storm, his presence a steady beacon as we outlined our strategy. I brought the documents I'd painstakingly sorted, and he analyzed every page with meticulous care, highlighting discrepancies in my brother's financial maneuvers. Our case needed to be more than compelling. It had to be irrefutable. The neighbors were a crucial aspect of my preparation. They had witnessed Louis's dismissive attitude toward Grandma, his lack of visits despite living nearby. With some trepidation, I approached Mrs. Logan, Grandma's next-door neighbor, whose sharp eyes never missed a thing. She welcomed me with a warm cup of tea, her kindness a comfort in those tense days. "I've seen less and less of him around," she confided, her voice laced with concern. Her statement, along with others, would form a vital part of our narrative, evidence of neglect that couldn't easily be refuted. I knew that medical reports were another component that would strengthen our case. Grandma's long-standing physician, Dr. Myers, a person we both trusted, was forthcoming with records that underscored her ability to make sound decisions. Each entry, a testament to her clear-mindedness, chipped away at Louis's shaky claims of her incapacity. I collected these with a fervor only matched by the determination growing within me. As the hearing date loomed closer, I immersed myself in the preparation, finding solace in the methodical process. The quiet hours spent organizing evidence became my sanctuary, each sorted document a piece of armor against the storm I knew was coming. I was acutely aware of the stakes. One night, as I assembled everything into a coherent narrative, Grandma shuffled into the room, her frail figure silhouetted in the doorway. Her gentle smile never wavered as she approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I trust you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Those simple words anchored me, each syllable reinforcing the resolve to protect her against Louis's betrayal. Her belief in me was a catalyst stronger than any document or testimony. The final piece of my preparation was a meeting with Mr. Everett at his home. Over cups of coffee, we rehearsed what lay ahead, going over potential questions, strategies to counter Louis's arguments. "We have to show them the truth," Mr. Everett stated, his voice filled with conviction. I nodded, the familiar weight of responsibility settling over me once more. In those weeks, each moment seemed to expand, the tension reaching a crescendo that echoed through every room, every interaction. Louis remained oblivious, his arrogance blinding him to the groundwork being laid for his downfall. To him, I was just the little sister, poking at shadows that didn't exist. But soon he would realize my quiet resolve was not to be trifled with. I spent the final evening before the hearing alone, reviewing our plan, the steady thrum of determination pulsing beneath my thoughts. Grandma's peaceful breathing from the next room was a reminder of the life I was fighting to preserve. I knew the path wouldn't be easy, but her faith in me made it possible to summon the strength needed to see this through. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, I felt more prepared than ever to confront the storm. Each piece of evidence, each statement was a carefully placed brick in the wall that would shield Grandma from Louis's greed. I was ready to stand before the court and lay bare the truth. With one final look at the organized files, a sense of quiet confidence settled over me. This was more than just a legal battle. It was a fight to safeguard the dignity and legacy of the woman who had given us everything. And with that realization, I closed the folder, steeling myself for the morning, ready to face whatever came next. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as people filed in, the air thick with the weight of unspoken judgments. I took my seat beside Mr. Everett, my fingers tracing the edges of the meticulously organized files, each one a testament to weeks of relentless preparation. Louis sat across the aisle, a self-assured smirk playing on his lips. His expression was one of condescension, as if he already knew the outcome, but he didn't know the full extent of what lay before him. The judge entered, and the room settled into a tense silence, save for the shuffle of papers and the muted coughs of the few spectators. I felt the eyes of the room on me, sensing both curiosity and skepticism. As the hearing commenced, I focused on the rhythmic cadence of my breath, grounding myself for the battle ahead. Mr. Everett was the first to speak, his voice calm and measured as he outlined the case. He presented the initial evidence, highlighting the financial discrepancies and the suspicious timing of Louis's guardianship application. Louis's attorney, undeterred, countered with arguments of necessity and implied familial duty. Louis nodded along, projecting an image of the devoted grandson. When my turn came, I rose with conviction. Despite the tremor of anxiety that threatened to creep in, I held steady. I began by painting a vivid picture of my grandmother's independent spirit, her lucidity, and her expressed wishes to live on her own terms. Each word was carefully chosen, laying bare the reality of her well-being. The financial records were next. I methodically detailed the transactions that had no traceable connection to her needs. Each one seemed to chip away at the facade Louis had constructed, exposing the truth beneath. Though I addressed the court, part of me spoke directly to Louis, hoping to pierce through his veneer of confidence. As I presented statements from neighbors and community members who had witnessed Louis's neglectful tendencies, I felt the tide beginning to shift. These weren't just numbers on a page. They were accounts of the careless disregard he had shown toward our grandmother's welfare. Louis's demeanor began to change, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. For the first time, his confidence wavered. His attorney attempted to redirect focus, suggesting that I was driven by personal vendettas rather than genuine concern. I remained silent, choosing not to engage with their provocations. Mr. Everett took over once more, reinforcing our stance with clarity and precision. He emphasized the gravity of the situation, urging the court to prioritize not just legal obligations but moral ones. As he spoke, I watched the judge, whose expression remained inscrutable yet attentive. In the final moments of my presentation, I brought forth the medical reports. I'd expected Louis's side to dismiss them, but their own lack of rebuttal highlighted their significance. These documents were proof of her mental acuity, of her readiness to speak for herself. And so we let the documents speak, allowing the truth to surface without embellishment. There was a brief recess, and I stepped outside to gather my thoughts. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. It felt like the calm before a storm, a moment of reflection before we headed back inside. As proceedings resumed, I returned to my seat, my resolve as sharp as ever. I looked over at Louis, who now seemed more aware of the precariousness of his position. The room was silent again, waiting for the judge's words. The judge began to dissect the information, weighing each piece with deliberate care. The strength of our evidence hung in the air, tangible and unyielding. Though I remained composed, inside me a turbulence of emotion churned, not of anger, but of a quiet satisfaction at seeing the truth finally laid bare. I could feel the eyes of the room shifting toward Louis, their curiosity now tinged with skepticism. His attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but the bravado from earlier had all but vanished. For the first time, he seemed truly unnerved. As the day's arguments drew to a close, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Regardless of what verdict would follow, I knew we'd done everything in our power to honor Grandma's wishes. I took a moment to breathe, letting the weight of the day's efforts settle over me, knowing we'd laid a solid foundation for what was to come. With the evidence clearly presented, my heart resonated with hope that justice would soon follow. And so we waited as the courtroom quieted to a standstill, each of us bracing for the decision that would undoubtedly change everything. The judge's voice echoed through the silent courtroom, each word deliberate and weighty. He cited the evidence I had painstakingly gathered, highlighting the financial misconduct with a clarity that was impossible to deny. When he ruled in my favor, granting me joint guardianship, a wave of relief washed over me, tempered by the gravity of what had almost happened. Louis sat beside his attorney, outwardly stoic but with a faint redness creeping into his cheeks. His eyes betrayed a flicker of disbelief, as if the outcome was something he never truly anticipated. The judge went on, mandating full transparency in managing Grandma's accounts. He stressed the responsibility attached to holding guardianship, a pointed reminder that any deviation would have serious legal consequences. I turned my gaze to the floor, a modest gesture of respect for the gravity of the ruling. Inside, however, a quiet triumph swelled, a victory not just for me but for Grandma's well-being. I imagined her in her garden, tending to her roses with care, unaware of the turmoil that had unfolded in her name. Louis finally stood, his movements slow and he nodded curtly at the judge, his voice barely audible as he acknowledged the decision. It was a moment without drama, but the resignation in his posture spoke volumes. He looked at me once, briefly, but I met his gaze with a calm reserve. There was nothing left to say. As I stood to leave, people began to shuffle out of the courtroom, their shoes clattering softly against the tiled floor. I waited until the room was almost empty before placing a supportive hand on Mr. Everett's arm. He had been instrumental in helping lay the pathway for justice, and I owed him my gratitude. "Thank you," I whispered, and he nodded, a knowing smile on his lips. The hallway outside was a wash of muted colors and low murmurs. The atmosphere was lighter somehow, as if the building itself breathed a sigh of relief. As I walked through the corridor, my heart felt unburdened. The weight of expectation had been lifted, replaced by a sense of closure. I paused before the courthouse doors, casting one last glance behind me. Louis was still inside, gathering his papers with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't look up as I left, and perhaps it was better that way. The bridge between us had been altered, perhaps irreparably, and I wondered what our family gatherings would be like moving forward. Outside, the afternoon sun shone brightly, a sharp contrast to the somberness of the recent past. As I walked to my car, I felt the warmth seep into my bones, thawing away the residual tension of the day. I took savoring the crisp air that felt almost new, transformed by the weight of victory and vindication. In the car, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. This journey had begun with a betrayal, a simmering deception hidden in the guise of family obligation. But it ended with the truth laid bare, with justice served, and with a certainty that Grandma's future was now secure, no longer a pawn in someone else's game. I focused on the road ahead, knowing there were still steps to take, but confident and assured for the first time in weeks. With the decision firmly in place, I was ready to take the next step, ensuring that Grandma had everything she needed to enjoy her golden years in comfort and care. There was satisfaction in knowing that her savings, untouched and secure, would now be used for her benefit, precisely as she had always intended. As I drove home, the tension of the day slowly dissipated, replaced by optimism for what lay ahead. Moving Grandma into her new home was a decision I didn't take lightly. The facility sat nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by gardens that I knew she would love. Each step was about reclaiming peace for our family and ensuring her golden years were spent in comfort, unclouded by the chaos Louis had nearly wrought. As I walked with her through the doors of the facility, she squeezed my hand with a warmth that reminded me of all the times she'd offered reassurance during my own uncertain moments. "It's beautiful here, isn't it?" she said, her voice filled with gentle appreciation. I nodded, grateful we had reached this point, where her happiness was the focus, not someone else's agenda. The sun filtered through the wide windows, casting a serene glow that blended with the hum of tranquil conversations around us. I watched her settle in, her eyes lighting up at the window view of a small pond surrounded by weeping willows. This was her space now, where she could thrive with dignity, and I felt a profound sense of relief knowing her savings would finally support her, not fund dreams that weren't hers. The next step was to ensure Louis couldn't meddle with her finances again. I spent hours with Mr. Everett sifting through documents and making the necessary adjustments to safeguard her accounts. It was vital that the clarity demanded by the court's decision was enforced. Every expenditure would now be scrutinized, and I intended to protect her wishes as fiercely as the court had empowered me to. It was a Thursday morning when I received a letter from the facility confirming Grandma's financial plan was now fully in place. Her resources were intact, dedicated solely to her care and happiness. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror as I held the letter, feeling like a weight had lifted from my shoulders. With Grandma settled and her finances secured, I knew it was time to face Louis one more time. Our confrontation came not with shouting, but with an exchange over a coffee table. He appeared detached, perhaps resigned to the outcome because he knew the truth had cemented his place on the periphery of our family's future. "I hope she's happy there," he stumbled, a hint of the brother I once knew peeking through his tired facade. There was a part of me that wanted to reach out, to mend the brokenness between us, but the hurt ran too deep for easy fixes. I chose my words carefully, a resolution coloring my voice. "She has everything she needs now, Louis. Her happiness is what matters. The past is done." He looked at me, the defeat in his eyes a bitter acknowledgement of what had been lost. Leaving that conversation, I found solace in knowing I'd done everything possible to shield Grandma from harm. Her joy was my quiet revenge against the betrayal, a triumph far greater than any temporary victory could offer. Driving back from the facility one afternoon, I glanced at the sun dipping behind the landscape, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and orange. There was a new peace in my footsteps as I walked into my home, the haunting presence of what could have been finally fading into mere shadows of memory. As I settled into the rhythm of daily life, I felt a gentle pride in knowing our family had navigated this storm and emerged not unscathed but stronger, perhaps wiser. Grandma's laughter on the phone became a balm, her anecdotes of daily life there proving she was truly at home. I realized then that every choice I made was leading us back to this peace, not just for Grandma, but for me as well. In the end, I found that sometimes justice doesn't shout, it whispers in the quiet moments of clarity and assurance. As I turned that thought over in my mind, I understood that while bridges might never fully mend, new paths often appear, lit by the truths we uncover. And that was enough.